In the unforgiving dust of the American West, a man who had lost everything stood before the unspeakable. 1888, Montana. Jebediah Stone. A rancher with empty pockets and a haunted heart attended an auction not for cattle, but for children. He saw 5 young souls, their eyes reflecting a world of loss about to be scattered to the winds of fate. In a moment that defied all logic, a decision born of desperation and a flicker of forgotten hope, he bought them all. This wasn't an act of charity. It was a gamble with the last remnants of his soul. And what he built with these 5 orphans wasn't just a home, but a legacy that would echo through the canyons of history. The dust of the Montana Territory in 1888 was a fine, gritty powder that settled on everything, a constant reminder of life's abrasive texture. It coated the brim of Jebediah Stone's worn hat, settled in the deep lines etched around his eyes, and clung to the threadbare collar of his shirt. At 42, Jebediah felt as ancient as the weathered buttes that broke the endless expanse of the horizon. His ranch, the Triple Horn, once a testament to his ambition, was now a skeleton picked clean by misfortune. Just 2 years prior, the name Jebediah Stone had meant something in the Sweet Grass Valley. His cattle were fat, his land was prosperous, and the laughter of his wife Martha and their son Little Tom had been the melody of his life. Then the fever came swift and merciless, a thief in the night that stole the music and left only a suffocating silence. It had taken Martha first, her hand growing cold in his as the sun set on a bleak Tuesday. Tom, barely 7, followed a week later, his small body surrendering to the same invisible monster. Grief had hollowed Jebediah out, leaving a ghost of a man to wander the empty rooms of his ranch house. The cattle neglected grew thin, the fences untended sagged and broke. A disastrously harsh winter, the likes of which even the old-timers couldn't recall, finished the job. He lost most of his herd, the frozen carcasses, a grim monument to his failure. Now all that remained were a few dozen head of bony cattle, a sprawling patch of arid land, and a debt to the bank in Livingston, a debt that loomed larger and more menacing than the crazy mountains to the west. The man who held that debt was named Alistair Finch. He was a banker with a predator's smile and eyes as cold and hard as the gold coins he hoarded. Finch had made it clear, in a voice as smooth and oily as his pomaded hair, that Jebediah's time was running out. "The land has potential, Stone," Finch had said during their last meeting, steepling his fingers on his polished oak desk. "But potential doesn't pay interest. You have until the end of the month." The end of the month was a week away. Jebediah rode his tired old horse Achilles into the dusty settlement of Big Timber. It wasn't much of a town, just a collection of wooden storefronts huddled along the railroad tracks, a place that smelled of coal smoke, manure, and cheap whiskey. He was there to sell the last of his wife's silver heirlooms, a locket, a pair of combs, a delicate bracelet. The pittance it would fetch wouldn't satisfy Finch, but it might buy him another week, another sliver of hope. He tied Achilles outside the saloon, the thought of a drink a tempting whisper in his mind. But he hadn't the coin for it, nor the stomach. Instead, he made his way to the general store. The bell above the door jangling a cheerless welcome. Inside he found the proprietor, Mr. Abernathy, a man whose face seemed permanently fixed in an expression of weary disapproval. As Abernathy weighed the silver, his beady eyes darting from the scales to Jebediah's face, a notice tacked to the community board caught Jebediah's eye. It was printed on cheap yellowed paper, the ink already fading. Public auction. Pursuant to the territorial statutes regarding the care and placement of indigent and orphaned children, 5 wards of the state will be placed into service. Bidding to take place at the town hall. Friday, 2nd p.m. Bidders must provide proof of sound financial standing and moral character. Jebediah read it once, then twice. An orphan auction. He'd heard of such things. Grim tales from back east of children sold like livestock to the highest bidder, their futures determined by the depth of a stranger's pockets. The practice was less common out here, but not unheard of. It was a cold, practical solution to a heartbreaking problem: what to do with the children left behind by tragedy. They were parceled out to families who needed an extra hand on the farm or in the house, their labor exchanged for room and board. "A sad business," a voice said beside him. It was Clara May Thompson, a young woman who worked part-time at the diner next door. She was barely 20, with a kind face and eyes that held a wisdom beyond her years. She'd been a friend to Martha, and always had a gentle word for Jebediah whenever she saw him. "A damned shame is what it is," Jebediah muttered, his gaze still fixed on the notice. "Treating children like they're a bushel of corn." "They're from that wagon train that got caught in the blizzard up on the Bozeman Trail," Clara May explained, her voice low. "The whole party froze, save for these 5. They've been staying with the pastor, but he's got a house full and a congregation that can barely feed its own." She sighed, tucking a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "I hear folks are interested. The Blackwoods need a boy for their smithy, and Mrs. Gable is looking for a girl to help in her boarding house. They'll be scattered to the 4 winds." Jebediah felt a strange pang in his chest, a dull ache in the hollow space where his heart used to be. He thought of Tom, of his bright, curious eyes, and the way he would follow him around the ranch, asking 1,000 questions. The idea of children being sized up, judged, and sold off stirred something in him, an indignation he hadn't felt in a long, long time. "Financial standing and moral character," Jebediah scoffed, gesturing at the notice with a bitter laugh. "Well, that counts me out on both counts." Abernathy cleared his throat, pushing a small stack of coins across the counter. $3.50. It's the best I can do." The amount was an insult, a confirmation of his pathetic state. $3. He took the coins, the cold metal, a stark contrast to the warmth of the silver that had once graced Martha's skin. He thanked the man, his voice a dry rasp, and turned to leave. "Mr. Stone," Clara May called softly. He paused at the door, his back to her. "You're a good man, Jebediah. Don't let folks or yourself forget that." Her words, meant to comfort, only twisted the knife. A good man wouldn't have let his ranch fall to ruin. A good man would have found a way. He gave a slight nod, not trusting himself to speak, and stepped back out into the harsh glare of the afternoon sun. He walked past the town hall, a squat, imposing building for a town so small. He could already picture the scene on Friday, the auctioneer, the crowd of bidders, the children lined up on the stage. He saw their faces small and frightened, their eyes scanning the crowd for a hint of kindness, a glimmer of hope in a world that had offered them none. He saw his own son's face among them, and the thought was a physical blow knocking the wind from his lungs. He mounted Achilles and began the long, slow ride back to the Triple Horn, the $3 in his pocket, feeling heavier than a millstone. The words on the notice haunted him. 5 wards of the state. 5 lives, their futures hanging by a thread. He was a fool, a broken, indebted fool, with no business meddling in the affairs of others. He had his own ruin to manage. Yet as the sun began to dip below the western horizon, painting the sky in brutal strokes of orange and purple, an idea began to form in his mind. It was a wild, desperate, and utterly insane idea. It was an idea that defied all logic, an idea that a rational man would have dismissed in a heartbeat. But Jebediah Stone was no longer a rational man. He was a man with nothing left to lose, and in the desolate landscape of his grief, the seed of that insane idea began to take root. He looked out over his barren land at the empty corrals and the silent house, and for the first time in 2 years, he didn't just see what he had lost. He saw the vast, aching emptiness, and he wondered with a tremor that was part fear and part something else entirely, what it might take to fill it. The $3.50 felt like hot coals in Jebediah's pocket. For 2 days he did nothing. He stared at the peeling paint on his kitchen wall, the silence of the house a roaring in his ears. The insane idea that had sprouted on the ride home had grown into a thorny, impossible thicket in his mind. Go to the auction. Bid on the children. The sheer lunacy of it was staggering. He was a man who could barely feed himself. His ranch was a breath away from belonging to Alistair Finch. The notice had been clear: sound financial standing and moral character. He possessed neither. He was a ghost, a failure, a walking monument to loss. Yet he couldn't shake the image of those 5 nameless faces. He couldn't silence the echo of Clara May's words: they'll be scattered to the 4 winds. He saw the Blackwood's decent people, but hard, needing a boy to swing a hammer until his arms ached. He saw Mrs. Gable, a sour-faced gossip, who would work a girl's fingers to the bone. He saw his own son, Tom, being led away by a stranger, his small hand lost in a large, indifferent one. On the morning of the auction, something shifted. Jebediah woke not with the usual heavy blanket of despair, but with a cold, clear sense of purpose. It wasn't hope. It was something harder, more resolute. He washed in the cold basin, shaved with his straight razor, for the first time in months, scraping away the grey stubble of his grief. He put on his only other shirt, the one Martha had insisted he keep for church, its fabric stiff and unfamiliar. He looked at the stranger in the mirror, a man with haunted eyes, but a rigid spine. He wouldn't go to watch. He would go to act. What he was going to do he still wasn't sure, but he couldn't stay here and let it happen. The town hall was crowded, the air thick with the smell of sweat, damp wool, and morbid curiosity. The people of Big Timber were there in force, their faces a mixture of pity and grim pragmatism. Jebediah stood at the back, his broad shoulders pressed against the wall, a silent observer on the edge of the town's conscience. He saw Alistair Finch near the front, looking smug and proprietary, as if he were personally overseeing a foreclosure on humanity. Then the pastor led them onto the stage. 5 of them. They weren't just a number on a notice anymore. They were real. The oldest was a boy of about 14, tall for his age, but thin as a rail with a mop of unruly brown hair. He stood slightly in front of the others, his arms crossed, his jaw set in a defiant scowl. His eyes, a sharp, intelligent blue, scanned the crowd with open contempt. He was a wall trying to shield the others with his own bony frame. Next to him, 2 girls, clearly twins, clung to each other. They were perhaps 10 years old, with identical braids of pale blonde hair and wide, terrified grey eyes. They moved as one, a single entity joined by fear. A younger boy, maybe 8, stood apart. He had a thatch of fiery red hair and a face full of freckles and fury. He kicked at the stage boards, His small fists clenched his expression, one of pure, unadulterated rage at a world that had dealt him this hand. And then there was the youngest, a tiny girl no older than 5 or 6, lost in a dress that was too big for her. She clutched a dirty handmade doll and stared at her own worn boots, her dark curls hiding her face from the sea of strangers. The auctioneer, a portly man named Peterson, with a booming voice designed for selling livestock, cleared his throat. "Folks, we have here 5 unfortunate souls, wards of the territory. They are healthy strong and eager to repay the kindness of a good home with hard work." A wave of nausea washed over Jebediah. He was listening to a sales pitch for human lives. "Let's start with the oldest boy," Peterson bellowed. "Name's Caleb, 14 years old, strong back, sharp mind. What am I bid for his services until the age of 18? "Mr. Blackwood." The blacksmith raised a hand. $20. $20 from Mr. Blackwood, a fine lad for a fine smithy. Do I hear 25? No one else bid. Caleb's face remained a mask of stone, but Jebediah saw the slight tremor in his hands. Sold. Just like that. "Next," Peterson boomed, gesturing to one of the twins. "This is Sarah, 10 years old. Nimble fingers, quiet disposition. Perfect for housework. What am I bid?" $15, came the sharp voice of Mrs. Gable. The other twin let out a small, choked sob and squeezed her sister's hand tighter. Jebediah's heart hammered against his ribs. He could see it happening, the scattering. A family already shattered by death was about to be pulverized by commerce. Peterson pointed to the other twin. And her sister Sophie, another fine girl. This was it, the breaking point. The thought of those 2 girls who had nothing left in the world but each other, being torn apart, was more than Jebediah could bear. The ghost of Tom whispered in his ear. The memory of Martha's hand in his was a fire on his skin. The auctioneer was about to call for a bid on the furious little redhead. Jebediah's feet moved before his mind had caught up. He pushed himself off the wall, his boots echoing on the floorboards as he took 2 steps forward. His voice, when it came, was a rusty croak, but it sliced through the murmuring crowd. "Stop!" Every head in the hall turned. Peterson squinted, annoyed at the interruption. "Do you have a bid, sir?" Jebediah's voice grew stronger, fueled by a righteous anger he hadn't felt in years. "I do," he said, his eyes not on the auctioneer, but on the 5 children. "I'll bid for the lot." A collective gasp swept the room. A stunned, disbelieving silence followed. People stared, mouths agape. Alistair Finch slowly turned in his seat, a look of pure derision on his face. "The lot?" Peterson stammered, his professional composure gone. "Sir, that's not how this is done." "Why not?" Jebediah challenged, his gaze sweeping the room. "You're selling them. I'm buying. I want all 5. Finch let out a short, cruel laugh that cut through the silence. "On what stone?" he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "You can't afford a sack of flour, let alone 5 children. Are you going to pay with the dust in your pockets, or that lien I hold on your worthless ranch?" Humiliation washed over Jebediah, hot and sharp. But then he looked at the children on the stage. The oldest boy, Caleb, was staring at him, his scowl replaced by a look of bewildered curiosity. The little girl had looked up, her dark eyes peeking out from behind her curls. He was not just Jebediah Stone, the failure. He was their only chance. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the coins Abernathy had given him. He strode to the stage and slapped them onto the auctioneer's podium. The clatter of the metal was pathetic in the large hall. "I have this," he said, his voice ringing with defiance. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Finch smiled a victor's smile. "And," Jebediah said, his voice dropping but carrying a new weight. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a folded, yellowed document. He held it up for all to see. "I have this. The deed to the Triple Horn Ranch. 320 acres. I will put up my land, my entire ranch, as collateral, for all 5 of them." The laughter died instantly. The room was utterly silent. This was not the act of a desperate man. It was the act of a madman. He was betting the last thing on earth he had. Finch shot to his feet. "This is preposterous. The man is bankrupt. He's not fit to care for a dog, let alone 5 children. The terms are clear, sound financial standing. He is the definition of unsound." The pastor who had cared for the children stood up. "Mr. Finch," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "The greatest tragedy for these children was losing their family. The second would be losing each other. Perhaps we should consider the man's offer." The auctioneer Peterson looked from the deed in Jebediah's hand to the furious face of the town's most powerful man. He was caught, but the deed represented a value far greater than the paltry bids he had received. "I'll make you a deal, Stone." Peterson said, his mind working quickly. He saw a way out. "A wager of sorts. We will grant you provisional custody, but you have 6 months. 6 months to pay off Mr. Blackwood's and Mrs. Gable's bids, and to prove to the territory and this town that you can provide for these children, that you can make that ranch profitable. If you fail—" He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "The deed to the Triple Horn and the service of these 5 children will revert to your primary creditor, to Mr. Finch's bank." Finch's anger subsided, replaced by a cold, calculating smile. It was perfect. In 6 months he'd get the ranch and the free labor. Stone was a fool. He would fail. Jebediah looked at the 5 children. Their faces were a mixture of fear, shock, and a tiny, fragile flicker of something he couldn't name. He had just gambled away his past and his future. He had no food, no money, and no plan. All he had was a failing ranch and a 6-month deadline to perform a miracle. He met the auctioneer's gaze. "Done," he said. The ride back to the Triple Horn was a journey through a landscape of silent tension. Jebediah had borrowed a rickety wagon from the sympathetic pastor, and the 5 children were huddled in the back, a small island of misery amidst the swaying, rattling boards. Caleb, the oldest, sat with his back pressed against the side, his watchful gaze fixed on Jebediah, who walked beside the weary horse. Daniel, the red-haired boy, glared at the passing landscape as if it had personally wronged him. The twins, Sarah and Sophie, had created a small fortress of their four bodies around the youngest Lily, who had retreated back into the world of her faceless doll. No one spoke. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon wheels and the heavy thud of Jebediah's own heart. When the ranch came into view, a low moan escaped one of the twins. Jebediah didn't need to look at their faces to know what they were thinking. The Triple Horn wasn't a place of hope. It was a place where hope had come to die. The sagging porch, the broken corral fences, the sun-bleached barn leaning at a drunken angle, it was a portrait of decay. He wasn't just a poor man. He was a poor man who had given up. The house was worse. When he pushed open the door, a cloud of dust motes danced in the single shaft of afternoon light, illuminating the neglect. The air was stale thick with the scent of sorrow. In the main room, furniture was draped in white dust sheets, giving the space the ghoulish feel of a tomb. He had brought them home, not to a ranch, but to a mausoleum. The girls can take the spare room. The boys, you can take my son's room. Jebediah said, his voice strained. He hadn't set foot in Tom's room in 2 years. Caleb looked at him, his expression unreadable. "We'll stay together," he stated. It wasn't a request. The first few days were a special kind of hell. The children remained a tight defensive unit, communicating in whispers and refusing to be separated. They viewed Jebediah not as a savior, but as a captor, their new owner. Caleb met his every instruction with a silent, challenging stare. Daniel was a phantom of fury, slamming doors and vanishing for hours, only to reappear with his face streaked with dirt and his eyes burning with defiance. The twins moved about the house like frightened mice, and Lily seemed to have become permanently mute, her only attachment to the filthy doll she would not release. Jebediah, a man accustomed to the solitude of his grief, was now drowning in a sea of hostile silence and unspoken needs. He was catastrophically out of his depth. On the third night, he attempted to make a real meal. The salt pork was rancid, the beans he boiled turned to a black, foul-smelling sludge on the bottom of the pot, and the biscuits he mixed were dense, floury rocks. He scraped the mess onto 5 tin plates and set them on the table. They stared at the food in disgust. Daniel, after a moment of simmering rage, picked up his plate and deliberately tipped it onto the floor. The clatter of the tin plate was like a gunshot in the silent room. Something inside Jebediah, stretched taut for days, finally snapped. "You ungrateful brat!" he roared, his voice a raw, ugly thing. "I spent my last dime on that. You'll eat what you're given." The children flinched back as if struck. Lily let out a terrified wail and buried her face in Sarah's dress. The fear in their eyes was a mirror, and in it Jebediah saw the reflection of a monster. He saw a bully, a tyrant, the very thing they had expected him to be. The rage evaporated as quickly as it had come, leaving behind a cold, sickening shame. He turned without a word and fled, stumbling out of the house and into the relative comfort of the barn. He sank onto a hay bale, his head in his hands, the smell of dust and decay filling his nostrils. He had failed. He had failed Martha and Tom, he had failed the ranch, and now he was failing these children he had supposedly saved. The weight of it all was crushing him. He sat there for what felt like hours, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks in the barn wood. He was just about to surrender completely to the despair when a soft light appeared at the barn door. It was Clara May Thompson, holding a lantern in one hand and a large covered basket in the other. Her face was etched with concern. "I heard what happened at the auction," she said softly, her voice a balm on his raw nerves. "The whole town is talking. I figured you all might be hungry." She walked past him into the house without waiting for an invitation. Jebediah, pulled by a force he didn't understand, followed her. He watched from the doorway as she entered the tense, silent kitchen. She didn't scold or command. She simply knelt, wiping up the spilled mess on the floor. Then she uncovered her basket, releasing the warm, rich scent of beef stew, fresh-baked bread, and apple pie. She spoke to the children in a low, gentle voice, asking their names, complimenting Sophie's braid, asking Daniel if he liked horses. Slowly, cautiously, they were drawn to the warmth of her and the food. They ate as if they hadn't seen a real meal in weeks, their initial suspicion melting away under the gentle persistence of her kindness. when they had finished, and a fragile peace had settled in the room. Clara May came back out to the barn. She found Jebediah still sitting on the hay bale, a statue of misery. "They're not cattle, Jebediah," she said, her voice devoid of judgment. "You can't just put them in a pen and expect them to fatten up. They're children who have seen things no one should ever see." She sat down on a milking stool opposite him. "You know what that's like. You of all people." He looked up, his eyes full of anguish. "I don't know what to do, Clara. I yelled at them. I scared them half to death. I'm no better than Finch." "That's not true," she said firmly. "Alistair Finch would have let them starve. You're just lost. Martha used to say you had a heart as big as this valley, but you buried it when you buried her and Tom." She leaned forward. "They need a home, not just a roof. And you need a family, not just ghosts. Maybe," she said, her words soft but powerful, "you can stop burying the past and start building a future. Together." Her words hit him harder than Daniel's plate hitting the floor. He had been so wrapped up in what he had lost that he couldn't see what was right in front of him, 5 broken souls who needed what he needed, a reason to keep going. He stood up, his joints cracking, and walked back to the house. The children watched him enter their guard immediately up. He didn't yell. He walked to the head of the table and leaned on it, his knuckles white. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling foreign and heavy on his tongue. "For yelling, for the food, for all of this." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "This house, it belonged to my wife, Martha, and my boy, Tom." He spoke their names aloud for the first time in 2 years. "They died, and I guess a part of me died with them. I haven't been living here. I've just been haunting the place." He looked at each of them in turn. "I don't expect you to trust me, or to like me. But I made a bargain, and you're all stuck with me for now. Clara May is right. We're all lost. Maybe we can find our way out of it together. I'm asking for a chance, a real one." No one responded, but the furious glare in Daniel's eyes had softened to suspicion. Caleb's defensive posture had relaxed just slightly, and in the dim lantern light, Jebediah thought he saw the smallest of nods from one of the twins. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't trust. But it was a start. It was a crack in the ice. The morning after Jebediah's apology was not a sunrise of sudden harmony. It was, however, different. The suffocating tension had been replaced by a fragile, watchful stillness. The children still moved with caution, but they no longer looked at him as if he might combust at any moment. His confession of his own loss had, it seemed, built a bridge, however rickety, across the chasm of their shared grief. Clara May's visit had been more than a delivery of food. It had been a delivery of hope. She became a quiet, steady presence at the Triple Horn. She'd ride out from town every few days with provisions purchased on credit she'd somehow arranged with Mr. Abernathy, and more importantly, she brought a sense of normalcy. She taught the twins, Sarah and Sophie, how to bake bread that didn't resemble a stone, how to mend clothes, and how to coax a small garden from the stubborn soil near the house. Her gentle patience was the glue that began to hold their fractured world together. Jebediah, meanwhile, threw himself into the Herculean task of resurrecting the ranch. He knew he couldn't do it alone. He gathered the children in the dusty yard, the 6-month deadline from the auction hanging over them like a guillotine. "This is the Triple Horn," he said, gesturing to the dilapidated buildings and broken fences. "It's not much now, but it's all we've got. If we're going to keep it, if we're going to stay together, we have to work." All of us. He looked at Caleb. You're strong. I need you to help me with the fences and the barn. It's man's work. It was the first time anyone had called Caleb a man. The boy's perpetual scowl didn't vanish, but a flicker of something pride perhaps softened his hard eyes. He nodded once, a sharp, quick gesture of acceptance. He turned to Daniel, the little ball of fire. Daniel, you're quick and you've got sharp eyes. I need a scout. Your job is to ride the fence lines ahead of us, find the worst breaks, and keep an eye on our few remaining cattle. Can you do that? Daniel, who had spent his first week trying to be invisible, looked shocked. He was being given a horse and a responsibility, not a chore. I can, he said, his voice small but firm. Sarah, Sophie, he said to the twins, you'll be in charge of the house, the garden with Clara May, and the chickens. A ranch needs a heart, and that's the house. They nodded in unison, their identical faces serious. Finally he knelt down to Lily, who was, as always, clutching her doll and hiding behind one of the twins. Lily, he said softly, your job is the most important of all. Your job is to collect the eggs, and to make sure everyone smiles at least once a day. A tiny, hesitant smile touched Lily's own lips, a fleeting ghost of a thing. But it was there. And so they began. The work was brutal, back-breaking, and endless. Jebediah and Caleb spent their days from sunup to sundown, wrestling with rotted posts and tangled wire. They sweated and swore and bled together. One afternoon, while trying to hoist a massive support beam in the collapsing barn, the rope slipped. The beam swung wildly, heading straight for Jebediah. Without a thought, Caleb shoved him, taking the full glancing blow of the heavy timber on his shoulder. He crumpled to the ground, his face white with pain. Jebediah rushed to his side, his heart seizing with terror. Caleb, are you all right? The boy gritted his teeth, pushing himself up. I'm fine, he growled, but he couldn't hide the wince of pain as he tried to move his arm. That night, as Clara May bandaged the boy's bruised shoulder, Caleb finally spoke to Jebediah. Really spoke. My pa, he said, his voice low, his eyes on the floor. He built our cabin, cut every log himself. He was strong. He would be proud of you. Jebediah said, his voice thick with emotion. It was a turning point. From that day on, Caleb worked not like a servant, but like a partner. Daniel, given a purpose, thrived. Astride one of Jebediah's steadier horses, he became the master of his small domain. His anger slowly burning away under the hot Montana sun, replaced by a fierce sense of ownership. He found a small hidden spring in a rocky outcrop at the far edge of the property, a discovery that was more valuable than gold in this arid land. Slowly, miraculously, the ranch began to breathe again. The fences stood tall. The barn, shored up and patched, no longer looked like it would surrender to the next strong wind. The house began to feel less like a tomb and more like a home filled with the scent of baking bread and the low hum of activity. But their meager successes were overshadowed by the looming problem of money. The bids for Caleb and the twins had to be paid. Alistair Finch's debt grew with each passing day. They had repaired the vessel, but they had no wind for its sails. One evening, as Jebediah was poring over old account books by candlelight, trying to conjure a solution out of thin air, Caleb approached him. I found something, he said, holding out a small leather-bound journal. It was in a loose floorboard in the barn loft. Jebediah took the book. The leather was cracked with age. He opened it to the first page. The elegant looping script belonged to his own father. It was his father's journal from the first years he had worked this land. Jebediah had never known it existed. He read for hours, losing himself in his father's words. He read about the early struggles, the harsh winters, the hopes and dreams poured into this very soil. And then he found it. An entry dated almost 30 years prior. October 12th, 1859. The creek has run low this season, but it revealed a surprise. Following the old game trail north of the cottonwoods, where the land rises into the bluffs, I found a seam. Not gold, Lord be praised, but something almost as good. A thick black vein of coal running clean and deep into the hillside. Too difficult to mine with just my own 2 hands and no way to transport it. But it is there. A hidden treasure for a future day. Jebediah's heart stopped. Coal. He read the entry again, his hands trembling. He knew the place his father described. A scrubby, overlooked corner of his property considered worthless. The next morning at dawn, he and Caleb took shovels and picks and went to the bluffs. They followed the dry creek bed, pushing through thick sagebrush until they found the spot his father had described. The earth was hard, rocky. They dug for an hour, their hope beginning to fade with each fruitless shovelful. Maybe he was wrong, Caleb panted, leaning on his shovel. No, Jebediah said, a feverish certainty gripping him. He wasn't. He swung the pickaxe with all his might, and this time it struck something with a dull, solid thud. Not rock. He fell to his knees, scraping away the dirt with his bare hands. And there it was, a seam of glistening jet-black coal as thick as his arm disappearing into the earth. It was real. They stood there covered in dirt and sweat and stared at the black vein running through the hillside. It wasn't just coal. It was firewood for the coming winter. It was fuel for the railroad. It was money. It was a future. For the first time since Martha and Tom had died, Jebediah Stone felt the unmistakable electrifying surge of hope. He looked at the boy beside him, and Caleb looked back, a slow, wide grin spreading across his face. In that moment, they weren't a bankrupt rancher and a purchased orphan. They were prospectors who had just struck the motherlode. The discovery of the coal seam transformed the Triple Horn. It injected a new frantic energy into their work. Hope, once a distant mirage, was now a tangible thing they could hold in their hands, black and dusty and full of promise. The challenge, however, was immense. As Jebediah's father had written, a 2-man operation could barely scratch the surface. They needed help. They needed equipment. And they needed a way to get the coal to the railroad depot in Big Timber. Jebediah sold his last few bony cattle, scraping together enough money for a sturdy used wagon and some basic mining tools. Every day was a race against the calendar. The boys, Jebediah and Caleb, would spend the daylight hours chipping away at the hillside, their faces and clothes permanently stained with black dust. Daniel would ferry loads of the coal back to a growing pile near the barn. The girls, managed by the ever-present Clara May, tended the expanding garden, which was now producing enough vegetables to feed them with a surplus to spare. The first small sale was a monumental victory. Jebediah loaded the new wagon and drove it to Big Timber, selling the coal directly to Mr. Blackwood for his smithy and to a few other townsfolk preparing for winter. He returned to the ranch not with empty pockets, but with $25 in cash. He marched into the kitchen, slapped the money on the table, and for the first time, the entire makeshift family celebrated. That evening he paid off Mr. Blackwood's $20 claim on Caleb. He handed the money to the blacksmith, who looked at Jebediah with a newfound respect. "I'll be damned, Stone," Blackwood said, counting the bills. "Maybe you're not as crazy as everyone thought." The news of the coal spread through Big Timber like wildfire. Jebediah Stone, the town failure, was suddenly a man of interest. Their biggest customer, however, was the Northern Pacific Railroad. The depot manager, a pragmatic man named Henderson, was skeptical at first, but the quality of the coal spoke for itself. He agreed to buy as much as they could deliver, paying a fair price that was more than enough to cover their debts if they could mine it fast enough. With a steady stream of income, life on the ranch changed. There was better food on the table, new boots for the children, and a sense of security they had never known. The hollow-eyed fear in the twins' gazes was replaced by the healthy glow of children who were well fed and cared for. Daniel's anger had been channeled into a fierce pride in his work. Lily began to talk, her small voice a constant stream of questions and observations, and Caleb, standing shoulder to shoulder with Jebediah, carried himself with the confidence of a young man who knew his own worth. But their success did not go unnoticed. Alistair Finch watched from his bank window as Jebediah's wagon laden with coal became a regular sight in town. Each trip was a nail in the coffin of his plan to seize the Triple Horn. The ranch he had dismissed as worthless was now a source of profit, and the bankrupt farmer he had ridiculed was proving to be resourceful and resilient. Finch's condescension curdled into a venomous resentment. He decided it was time to intervene. One afternoon, a well-dressed man on a fine horse rode out to the Triple Horn. He introduced himself as Mr. Davis, a representative from the Territorial Land Office. He was polite professional and carried a leather satchel full of official-looking documents. "Mr. Stone," he said, accepting a glass of water from a nervous Sophie. "It has come to our attention that you have begun a mining operation on your property." "That's right," Jebediah said, his guard immediately up. "A small one, for personal use and a bit of local sale." "I see," Davis said, pulling a map from his satchel. "According to our surveys, your property, the Triple Horn, does indeed contain a significant coal deposit." He smiled a thin, reptilian smile that reminded Jebediah of Finch. "However, according to Territorial Ordinance 74B, the mineral rights for this entire quadrant were sold to a third party some years ago. You own the surface land, Mr. Stone, but you do not own what lies beneath it." The words hit Jebediah like a physical blow. "What? That can't be right. My father homesteaded this land." "The laws change," Davis said smoothly. "I'm afraid the coal you've been mining and selling does not belong to you. It belongs to the Montana Land and Mineral Company." He paused for effect. "And I have here a cease and desist order. Any further mining will be considered theft of company property. They will prosecute." Jebediah felt the blood drain from his face. The hope that had burned so brightly was extinguished in an instant, leaving behind the cold ash of despair. All their work, their sweat, their plans for the future gone. "Who?" Jebediah managed to choke out. "Who is the Montana Land and Mineral Company?" Davis shrugged, packing his satchel. "A consortium of investors, I believe. The primary stakeholder is a local businessman, a Mr. Alistair Finch." The betrayal was so sharp, so vicious, it stole Jebediah's breath. Finch hadn't just waited for him to fail. He had laid a hidden trap, a legal snare that would spring the moment he started to succeed. He had owned the mineral rights all along. He had let Jebediah do all the hard work of discovering and excavating the coal, only to snatch it away at the last second. As Davis rode away, Caleb came to stand beside Jebediah. "What is it? What did he want?" Jebediah couldn't speak. He just stared at the black pile of coal, their mountain of hope now a monument to their own foolishness. He had been so focused on fighting the deadline, he had never thought to check the fine print. He had led them all into a dead end. That night, the house was silent again, but this time it was a heavy, defeated silence. The children knew something was terribly wrong. They watched Jebediah, who sat staring at the cold fireplace, the land office order, clutched in his hand. The next morning, Jebediah rode into town. He didn't go to the bank. He went to the diner. He found Clara May polishing glasses behind the counter. He told her everything, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. She listened, her expression hardening with anger. "That snake," she whispered. "That greedy, heartless snake." She put down her cloth and came around the counter. "Jebediah, you can't give up." "It's over, Clara," he said. His shoulders slumped. He won. "I have less than 3 months left on the auction wager, and my only source of income is gone. There's no way I can pay him. He'll take the ranch. He'll take the children." Clara May's eyes flashed. "No, he won't." She leaned closer, her voice a fierce whisper. "My father was a lawyer before he passed. He taught me to read contracts. He always said the devil isn't in the details, he's in what's not there. Let me see that deed, Jebediah, and the order from that Mr. Davis. Let me see all of it." With nothing left to lose, he gave her the papers. She spread them out on an empty table, her brow furrowed in concentration. She read them once, then twice, her finger tracing the legal jargon. Jebediah watched, expecting nothing. After a long silence, she looked up. There was a slow, dangerous smile forming on her face. "Jebediah," she said, her voice electric. "I think Mr. Finch made a mistake. A very, very big one." Clara May's diner became their war room. Poring over the documents, her sharp eyes found the loophole Finch had missed. "He owns the coal, Jebediah," she said, her voice electric with discovery. "But you own the water. The territorial ordinance gave Finch the right to extract minerals, but said nothing about access to the resources needed for mining. Without Jebediah's water from the creek and the new spring, the coal was worthless." The day of the deadline, Alistair Finch held a public meeting to gloat over his victory. As he moved to foreclose on the ranch and claim the children, Clara May and the Stone family, walked down the aisle. Before the stunned crowd, Clara May laid out their counteroffer. Finch could have the water and access to the land, but at a price so high it would erase any profit from the coal. Trapped in his own scheme, Finch was checkmated. Clara May delivered the final blow. Jebediah would waive all fees in exchange for 2 things: the complete cancellation of his debt and the sale of all mineral rights to him for $1. Faced with public ridicule and a legal dead end, Finch furiously signed an agreement to the terms and stormed out of the town hall, his plans in ruins. Jebediah picked up the paper a free man, surrounded by his children and the woman who had engineered their salvation. He had won. The Triple Horn was truly theirs. The defeat of Alistair Finch marked a new dawn for Big Timber. Humiliated Finch sold his bank and fled the territory, freeing the town from his shadow. With the debt erased and the mineral rights secured, the Triple Horn Ranch was reborn. The mine thrived, becoming the Triple Horn Coal Company, and its success brought jobs and prosperity that rippled through the valley. Jebediah, with Caleb as his foreman, had turned a desperate gamble into the region's economic heartbeat. The real transformation, however, was within the walls of the ranch house. The tomb of sorrow became a home bustling with life and laughter. Jebediah Stone was no longer a ghost haunted by his past. The 5 children he had saved had in turn saved him, piecing his broken heart back together. He formally adopted all 5, giving them the name and security they deserved. He had found his purpose not in what he could take from the land, but in what he could give to his newfound family. This family was made complete when Jebediah married Clara May Thompson under the old cottonwood tree. She had been the architect of their victory and the glue that held them together. Becoming his wife and a mother to the children was a natural culmination of her unwavering faith and love. Years later, Jebediah, now a grandfather, would look out over the thriving ranch he had almost lost. He had walked into an auction a broken man and emerged the patriarch of a dynasty built not on blood, but on courage and love. The Stone family's legacy wasn't just in the coal they mined, but in the community they built, the school they founded, and the hope they represented. They had taken the broken pieces of their lives and forged them into something stronger, a testament to the fact that the most valuable treasures are the ones we find in each other. The story of Jebediah Stone and his children is a powerful reminder that family is not always born of blood, but forged in the fires of adversity and built on the foundation of love. It shows us that even in our darkest moments, when all seems lost, a single act of courage can change everything. A choice to fight for others can be the very thing that saves ourselves. Their legacy proves that the greatest fortunes aren't mined from the ground, but built in the human heart. If this story of redemption, resilience, and the incredible power of family touched you, please take a moment to hit the like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true stories that inspire and remind us of the strength of the human spirit. Thank you for watching.